Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, I wanted to discuss with you AMD. Now that Nvidia have essentially just taken over the internet with news of the RTX 30 series, aka Ampere. Side note, thank you so much, Jansen, for calling it the 30 series and not 21. I think it's a good time as any to talk about AMD and how I feel that AMD will be positioning itself for the next generation. AMD have been a very interesting company of late. They've really evolved. The leadership of Lisa Su has been second to none. I think that to say that she's turned the AMD ship around is a gross understatement. It's like AMD are a completely different company. Since we saw first Zen processors launch, which again feels oh so long ago, and yet it was only 2017, since then AMD on the CPU side have been executing relentlessly. Zen to Zen Plus was kind of a small step, admittedly, but Zen to Zen 2 was a huge leap, and it looks set to be the same thing for Zen 3 too. That was kind of a weird statement, but anyway, you get my point. Zen 3 is looking to be extremely promising. Again, 15% IPC gains to integer performance to 300 MHz in terms of clock frequency. It seems like the single core performance has been really something AMD are focusing on with Zen 3, and I believe that Intel are going to be under an immense amount of pressure. I'm hearing that AMD are doing extremely well against Intel's upcoming server processors. I can't give too much information as I was asked to keep quiet on that, but yeah, just long story short, AMD are beating them in several fronts. But on the GPU side, things have been a bit different. While Turing wasn't a huge leap in terms of traditional rasterization performance, it was still, faster than the GTX 1080 and 1080 Ti. And AMD for the RX 5000 series didn't really have a card which could compete with Nvidia's high-end. But this seems to be changing with RDNA 2. I first leaked the existence, of Big Navi, or Navi 21 and 23, and I mentioned that internally AMD's engineers were calling it the Nvidia killer. And it's very unusual for AMD to be so bold internally. Externally, with marketing departments, we all know how that works. But internally is a bit of a different story. And engineers, they're a lot more honest with one another internally. And it's very interesting that even the engineers believe that RDNA 2 is looking to be something special. As I then leaked that we will see features such as hardware-based ray tracing for the GPU, again another exclusive, it became very obvious that AMD for the most part were trying to feature match Nvidia. And this makes a lot of sense, as we then learnt that DirectX 12 Ultimate was going to be feature parity for the Xbox as well as the PC. Microsoft wanted a GPU which would be able to encapsulate all of these next generation techniques. Meanwhile, Sony too, the same thing. Sony were pushing for hardware-based ray tracing, and this stuff is going to be so important for the next generation of PC games, but also consoles too. So this leaves us with a lot of questions. The first is, what can we expect for AMD in terms of a strategy against Nvidia? What will be the performance, and what exactly will they be doing in terms of features? Well, I think AMD's strategy is still going to be to undercut Nvidia. I suspect that AMD will live up to the rumours that we've been hearing so far, and the GPUs as well as what AMD themselves have said, and they will launch the GPUs in Q4. I don't imagine we're going to see the complete line of GPUs. This makes sense. It's exactly what we've seen in pretty much every launch ever from either AMD or Nvidia. Just like Nvidia haven't announced formally cards such as, let's say, the RTX 3060, we can probably imagine that those cards are either going to launch very late this year from Nvidia, or more likely will launch early next year. And I suspect that AMD will probably have cards coming out this year, which will likely try to compete against Nvidia's higher-end GPUs. I suspect that's probably going to be the goal. And then they will probably try to launch more GPUs to fill out the stack. And this, again, is also close to what we've seen from AMD with GPUs this time. We saw the 5700 and 5700 XT launch first, and then of course, just even now, we're seeing the 5500 XT, the 5300, and so on start coming out, which I'll admit is kind of late at this point, but, you know, whatever. As for performance, I don't believe that it's going to be a situation where AMD are screwed. And I say this because of several logical jumps. Now, if you remember the OpenVR benchmark, which was February, he says, I probably should have made a note of that, but it was like February-ish. AMD were outperforming an RTX 2080 Ti by about 30%. We don't know the details specifically of how the test was conducted. We don't know, for example, how late the silicon was. We don't know the exact configuration of it. So how many CUs were operational? What clock speed was it compared to what is it possible to run at? Just very simple what I mean by that. Let's say the max speed of the GPU is 2 GHz for the final production. Was this running at 1600 MHz, for example? What about drivers? All of these things. But still, AMD were outperforming Nvidia by quite a bit, which is a good sign. All of the rumours we've seen also point to 80 compute units. Now, you can look at the performance of a card like the 5700 XT, and assuming there's not a glaring flaw in like the GPU scheduler or the way that the GPU is handling resources, and I don't want to get super technical into this video, so again, I'm going to keep this simple to go through, but assuming there's no glaring flaws like massive shortages of memory bandwidth, scheduler problems, terrible drivers, or anything like that, you can get a fairly reasonable understanding just by doubling the number of compute units and saying, well, clock frequencies are probably going to be a bit higher. We'll get to clocks in a moment. And then AMD themselves have confirmed that it's got a higher IPC. So even if you say worst case scenario, we know it's going to outperform the RTX 2080 Ti by quite a bit. The 3070 from AMD is, from Nvidia, is looking to be about on par, maybe a little faster than the 2080 Ti. So we can probably guess that AMD's cards are going to be around the 3080. Now, whether it's going to be faster than the 3080, I don't know, but I don't think it's very difficult to imagine that at the very least, AMD are going to be nipping at the heel of Nvidia. And we know AMD is super power efficient. We know this for several reasons. One, Sony and Microsoft are utilizing it for their games console. And if you look at the Hot Chips conference, which I've already done a breakdown of, the console itself for the Xbox, the whole APU is like, I think it's like 140 watts, I can't remember offhand, but it's so low in terms of power consumption, it's nothing. And again, that's running at 1825 MHz, 52 compute units. The PlayStation 5, meanwhile, is hitting 2230 MHz for its GPU. Yes, it's only 36 compute units, but think of it this way. 36 compute units running at 2230 MHz in a console form factor is nuts. It's very impressive that they've managed to achieve that, and I mean that as a compliment to Sony, Microsoft, and of course AMD. We also know that AMD themselves have confirmed that the GPUs are much more efficient performance per watt. We've seen official slides for this. And this is also, again, backed up by Microsoft's own slides, which show impressive gains in performance per watt. long story short, I think that AMD's GPUs are going to be pretty good in terms of power consumption. I also had a more recent exclusive that's told me that the flagship product from AMD, which we'll call Navi 21, I was told that AMD were initially targeting a maximum TDP of 250 watts, which is obviously lower than what Nvidia are going to be operating at with the 3080, which is 350 watts. I will say though that the average person, this is from speaking to, just general people, let me know if you feel differently, but a lot of people, especially if they're not building like a small form factor, they don't actually give a rat's ass about power consumption. I'll be honest, I'm not really that bothered by it. I more care about, is the fan quiet? Nvidia, it can be 350, it doesn't bother me too much. I'll just be really honest. I know that as a reviewer, I'm supposed to really clamp down on power consumption. I don't really care. I more am focused on, is it noisy? Is it frustrating when you're gaming and all you can hear is If that's the case, then that bothers me. Otherwise, I don't really give a rat's ass, if I'm honest. So yeah, it's something that's going to be a PR win for AMD, the board efficiency, but I think it's going to be a performance question and also price. Now, this brings me to a very good hint that AMD are in a good position. Nvidia are pricing their cards so competitively. The rumours were that we would see the 3080 launch at $800. Well, it's launching at $700. Like in the UK, I think it's Nvidia UK have it for $649. That's Great British Pounds, and yeah, that's cheaper than what a lot of folks expected. I'm going to focus purely on the 3080. You know the prices of Nvidia's products by now. Again, that's cheaper than most people expected Nvidia to charge for their card. And I think that this is a good indicator that they know AMD are going to be competitive and they're probably not going to be charging like, $1,000 for their GPU. I don't know if they're going to be cheaper than Nvidia, but I suspect that they're going to be within that ballpark, which again is good for us. I think this generation of cards from both companies is going to be very, very interesting. I suspect that both companies are going to have products which are going to be very compelling to purchase. We can also make some guesses based upon specification leaks. Again, we've seen the two flagship GPUs, which are 80 compute units, 72 compute units, and performance targets, which have leaked. The thing is, I'm hearing that a lot of the specs that have leaked, in terms of clock frequencies and that type of stuff, are not accurate, because AMD are still tweaking stuff. So the AIBs at this point have still not got final specs. I don't know how true that is, but again, that's what I'm hearing. From a personal perspective, I think that AMD will not beat the 3090. I think that the 3090 is going to be the highest end SKU in terms of what's available on the market. And I suspect, again, that Nvidia will launch cards such as the 3080 Ti. But that's actually fine. If AMD come in, undercut Nvidia by a little bit, but have a card which is, let's say, a couple of percent slower than Nvidia, has fewer features, again, I think Nvidia will still have more features. For example, RTX Studio and all of this stuff. Whether that bothers you, whether that interests you or not, is down to you, of course, as a user. I do think there's a good chance, and I'm not saying this via a leak, but I'm saying this from logical sense, there's a decent chance that AMD will have technology like RTX I/O, which of course is basically decompression technology, allowing the GPU to offload reading from the SSD from the CPU. I'm saying that from a logical perspective, given what Microsoft are doing for the Xbox, Sony for the PlayStation, direct storage. There's probably going to be a slightly different method of it compared to what Nvidia are doing, but I suspect that it's going to be very similar. Hardware-based ray tracing, it's going to be interesting to see how the performance is. I'm very curious to compare, let's say, a 3080 versus, I don't know what the cards are going to be called, but let's just call it the 6800, and we'll compare that against a 2080 Ti. And if we were to compare that against, if we compare that several benchmarks, let's say, I don't know, Control, Cyberpunk, and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and maybe one other game, and just see how the ray tracing affects each card in terms of performance loss, disabling DLSS, of course, for Nvidia, and also enabling it. I would be interested to see that. And speaking of DLSS, I think that and Nvidia's RTX technology is going to be what Nvidia are marketing. I think DLSS is going to be a really nice performance win for Nvidia. I know not everyone loves it, but I think a lot of folks who are criticizing it saw early coverage of DLSS 1 and haven't really given DLSS 2 a chance. I can say as someone who really looked into DLSS 2, I did a whole video on it. At times, I was just startled with how well it does. 1080p to 4K, it's not always as good as native, I'm not going to lie to you. But if you're at a decent distance and you're not like zooming 200, 1,000 times into the image, especially if you're like in action, you cannot tell. And if you're upsampling from a higher resolution, say 1440p to 4K, it's basically imperceptible, at least in my opinion. If it's DLSS 1, it's a different story, but if it's DLSS 2, like we see in Wolfenstein, like we see in, again, Control, which has an update, I think it's very impressive. I'm hoping certain games, like Metro, actually get an update for this, but we can only wait. I think RTX technology took a long time to come out, which is a shame, to really be fully utilised. But it is understandable, given it's a very different way of rendering a scene. Especially given, of course, Nvidia were the only option at that time. I do think that AMD will have some kind of DLSS-ish tech. After all, Microsoft let the cat out of the bag and said that they can upsample from 4 and 8-bit operations, and I suspect that Nvidia will have some competition there from AMD, but I don't know if it's going to be as good as DLSS. Does it have to be as good? Well, again, if it does a fairly decent job, maybe not. This is a pure prediction. I suspect Nvidia will be a little more expensive than AMD. I suspect Nvidia will have more features than AMD. I suspect Nvidia will have a higher performing set of cards than AMD. But I suspect that the reverse is also true. I suspect that AMD are going to be fantastic value. I think that their drivers have improved immeasurably over the past year or so. I think that I was recently testing the 5600, and I think it's a really nice card. I think that the drivers have really improved. I really like what AMD have been doing with the drivers, actually, in terms of being able to tweak in game and all of this stuff. I think it's really cool. I think that AMD are going to be in a very good position for the next generation. And I'm very happy about this. The dark horse to me is Intel. We all know that XE is coming for the discrete GPU market. No one has any real idea what the performance is outside of Intel themselves. They've said that it will be targeting, kind of mainstream and high-performance gaming. We know that it's got features like hardware-based ray tracing. We know that it can do things like variable rate shading and tons of other stuff because Microsoft have confirmed that even. But we don't know the final performance. Intel's drivers are actually pretty decent, I will say, for their GPUs. So I guess what I'm trying to say is my personal belief, Nvidia are probably still going to win in terms of raw performance. I think that the 1390 is going to be the fastest card. I think sometimes stars align, and I think this time around, Nvidia's stars aligned because they've got 8nm, which is obviously a nice performance bump. The double operations per clock, the frankly ridiculous improvements in tensor core performance, hardware-based ray tracing performance, the massive number of CUDA cores that Nvidia have packed in, plus as well architectural improvements for Ampere. But fortunately for AMD, they were not sitting on their butts the last several years. They've got a really nice GPU, and you know what? I don't think that the Nvidia killer comment is too far off. I think Nvidia are not going to be in trouble because Nvidia have such a good ecosystem and such a good lineup of cards. But I think that it's really pressured Nvidia to be as aggressive as possible, and I love that. The next couple of years are going to be mind-boggling in computer graphics. And I know that Ampere is not even out yet, and that RDNA 2 is not even out yet, but I feel kind of emotional because I love computer graphics. I feel emotional thinking about what we can get with Hopper, and obviously that's pretty much confirmed to be MCM. RDNA 3 is basically rumoured to be MCM. And, wow. Yeah. I think it's going to be pretty awesome. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you like these type of videos, let me know. I always feel kind of just weird rambling on a camera for I don't actually know how long this video has been recording for, but I always feel kind of weird just rambling at you guys. But if you enjoy it, do let me know. We will be doing full RTX 30 coverage and of course RDNA 2 coverage when those products are available, so the normal stuff, subscribe if you are interested. There will also be the hot chips analysis. I'm basically finished it now, just a bit of tiny few bits of cleanup. Actually, I actually recorded the intro and extra a few minutes ago, so I'm dressed in exactly the same clothes. So don't think I've worn don't think I've worn the same t-shirt 2 days in a row or something like that. And yeah, I just need to add a tiny little bit more for the SSD technology in the Xbox, and then that's going to be recorded probably tomorrow morning. Because I know a lot of you have been asking me about that, but it's just been so manic the last, several days because of all of the different announcements and stuff. But thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and bye for now.